Okay.
Okay.
No.
So, I would like to welcome you all. Unfortunately, I'm referring only to you that are present in this room because we haven't managed yet to connect with the YouTube channel, but I think that the problem will be resolved. So, a warm welcome to you all in this event. I think it's a very important event because it brings together people from many different fields to talk about a very salient issue of today's societies on a world basis. Okay, climate change affects everybody, whether we like it or not. It does, and what is very, very interesting in this kind of events is that people from very different fields can listen to the way various other fields think about these issues. So today it will be more or less the side of the economists. And I believe that this is useful because sometimes people think that are not economists, that we as economists are a little bit strange in the way we see the world. Again, welcome to everybody. Again, I hope that the problem will be resolved. I'm very stressed today with these issues. As I said before, never organize an event on a rainy day in Athens. So, Stefana, the stage is yours for the intro. So let me sit here.
Great. Good afternoon. I'm Stefanos. I'm the director of the Columbia Global Center here in Athens, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's event. Thank you for taking the time to come exactly at an unfortunately and rarely rainy day. I'd also like to sincerely thank the university for the warm hospitality, for Irene for all the great work in putting this event together, and to all our distinguished panelists today. I think it's going to be a very exciting discussion between them, but also with our audience. This is something that we always strive to do, is to have conversation exactly that transcends borders, disciplines, and approaches. And so I really look forward to the discussion that we're going to have. Today's event is part of a broader initiative of Columbia Global in the wake of the COP30 summit that is going to take place in Brazil. And so, as you saw before, we had all the centers around the world, and we've been hosting events from different localities, different disciplinary perspectives around this, just to exactly show how this is, first of all, a global problem that needs a global solution. And I'm particularly delighted that when hopefully the online version is going to be available, but when we're going to post it online, that a broader global audience can see the changes and the policy lessons perhaps that entail from Greece's example, because we might know between us that Greece has made enormous changes and improvement in the past few years, and maybe that's something for the broader region, but on a global scale as well. I don't want to take any more of the precious time that we have, so without any further ado, I'd like to invite the speakers and our moderator to come on stage. So thank you all, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you.
So I'm Irene Lazarou, a PhD candidate in Athens University of Economics and Business, and research associate at the IOVE, the Foundation of Industrial and Economic Research. And I was a Fulbright visitor to Columbia Climate School, and hence this amazing opportunity to have you here. And I'm very honored to moderate this panel. The Mediterranean remains a climate flashpoint. Wildfires, rising seas, biodiversity loss, and mounting water stress. Greece's experience offers a grounded direction for action, reflecting regional exposure across the region of the Mediterranean, aiming for the need for climate vision to be integrated with economic realism, advancing decarbonization while maintaining flexibility and social cohesion in the path towards transition. Our panel will explore how regional realities inform global ambitions and how actionable policies can accelerate progress. Today, with input from experts across academia, think tanks, and policy design specialists, we will explore how national and regional strategies intersect with global imperatives. We will cover disaster preparedness, economic planning, climate diplomacy, and policy design grounded in research. Our esteemed speakers bring a blend of policy insight, academic research, and practical field experience. Starting with a brief introduction for each speaker. Jeff Schlegelmilch is an associate professor for professional practice in climate. He's also the director of the National Center for Disaster Preparedness at Columbia Climate School, as well as the director of executive education and non-degree programs for the Columbia Climate School. His areas of expertise include public health preparedness, community resilience, and the integration of public and private sector capabilities. In addition to his work at Columbia, he also served as an advisor to private sector organizations on topics related to grid resilience, planning, and advised leaders on preparedness systems and policy at all levels of government. He is an opinion contributor to The Hill, and he's frequently called upon as an expert to numerous media outlets. He's also the author of Rethinking Readiness, A Brief Guide to 21st Century Mega Disasters, and co-author of Catastrophic Incentives, Why Our Approaches to Disasters Keep Falling Short, both published at Columbia University Press. I had the great pleasure of collaborating with Professor Schlegelmilch while my research visited Columbia Climate School and the National Center for Disaster Preparedness the previous year as a Fulbright grantee. And it's a pleasure to meet you again in the other side of the Atlantic, in my home university, Athens University of Economics and Business, under the occasion of such a meaningful discussion. Thank you for being here.
Wonderful to be here.
Professor Dr. Phoebe Koundouri is an economist renowned for pioneering human-centric interdisciplinary mathematical systems that enable the sustainable interaction between nature, society, and the economy. She holds an MPhil and PhD from the University of Cambridge and has held academic positions at the University of Cambridge, UCL, LSE, the University of Reading, UK, and the Technical University of Denmark. She is currently professor at the School of Economics, Athens University of Economics and Business, visiting professor at the Department of Earth Sciences, University of Cambridge, and senior research fellow at Peterhouse, University of Cambridge. She is the founder of the Alliance of Excellence for Research and Innovation, IFORIA, involving 200 researchers, and she is included in various prestigious rankings as top 1-2% of world scientists. With
that's enough. I don't know what
I
they
can
gave you.
continue. Of course. Thank you, Professor Koundouri, for being here. Thank you so much. And with Mia Kyriakopoulou is an assistant professor in the Department of Economics at Athens University of Economics and Business, and a research fellow at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences and the University of Luxembourg. She represents Greece in the European Association of Environmental and Resource Economists and was recently elected as a council member of the association, with her term starting in January 2026. Her research spans environmental economics, sustainable development, urban economics, transportation, and social networks, and her work has been published in leading international journals, including Nature, the Journal of Environmental Economics and Management, and the Journal of Economic Geography. She has coordinated and contributed to numerous research projects on environmental policy design and urban and environmental challenges funded by the European Commission, the Swedish Environmental Protection Agency, the Swedish Research Council for Sustainable Development, the Bank of Greece, the Greek Ministry of Environment, and WWF. And before returning to Greece, Dr. Kyriakopoulou spent 12 years in Sweden, working at the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, the University of Gothenburg, and the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. During this period, she coordinated a large number of national and international projects and collaborated closely with the Swedish Environmental Protection Agency, as well as with municipalities, local authorities, and on initiatives related to climate change, resilience, and adaptation. Thank you very much, Professor Kyriakopoulou, for being here. So I will pose a few questions to our speakers, and then we will open the floor for discussion. Professor Schlegelmilch, from your experience leading the National Center for Disaster Preparedness, what mechanisms or programs have proven most effective in translating disaster research into actionable policies and practices? Do you believe there is a clear transferability space, or the developed mechanisms are tied to the country or state that develops them?
Yeah, a great question. I think one of the so when we talk about disasters and when we talk about climate adaptation, it kind of runs contrary to the ways that we kind of think about science more generally. You know, when we think about science, it's a very reductionist approach, right? If we want to think about biology, we break it down into chemistry. If we want to understand chemistry, we have to break it down into physics. If we want to understand physics, we have to break it down into math. This is why I was a theater major for my undergrad. When we're talking about disasters, we're looking at the intersection of many different fields of study. We're looking at the intersection with how sociology overlays with the natural sciences. We look at economics, we look at the physics of how storms form and things like that. And so I always like to say in disaster science, what we're really thinking about is we're really talking about how it's almost like music. When you listen to music and you play two notes perfectly in tune, you'll hear the third note, you'll hear the harmonics. And that's where the discovery is in this kind of science. It's at the experience of resilience is at the intersection of all of these different fields, not sort of in the deconstruction of our understanding of the world. And so to answer your question more directly, the types of mechanisms that are most effective in addressing this are those that seek to go beyond understanding the bits and pieces of our world, but how it comes together more holistically. We were having a conversation before this panel about how the arts are getting heavily engaged with all of this, and I can think of no better field to be engaged, because that is the most representative of that intersection of where we spend our lives. And so when we have panels like this, when we have schools like this, when we have programs like this that are designed to illuminate the intersection, to look at it from multiple angles, that's where we find the most lasting kind of resilience, where we understand those trade-offs between economic growth and long-term fragility, when we understand, you know, the differences between short-term gain and long-term resilience, and also when we find ways of valuing maybe the deep cultural heritage and more kind of sort of historical identity and the value of that doesn't always show up in the metrics and the numbers that we use for making policy decisions. That's where we find sort of the deepest solutions for all of this. So I look forward to hearing from all of our panelists and hearing from all of you as well too. But those are really, I think, some of the examples that come to the top of mind.
Thanks so much. Sure. And Professor Koundouri, building on your leadership as co-chair of the UN Global Sustainable Development Report that is to be delivered in 2027 and is the last before the 2030 SDG deadline, and drawing on Greece and the Eastern Mediterranean experience, how can we translate, you believe, high-level climate commitments into tangible, locally meaningful resilience outcomes using economic instruments such as the green growth models, impact investing, climate finance mechanisms?
Yes. So let me just say that it is important, like Jeff said, to understand that interdisciplinarity is the only pathway towards solving 90, even more % of the current problems that we are facing as humanity, as society, as economy, as natural management. So I'm really happy. This is the first time in my life I came to this university in 2007 or 8. I spent 18 years before in UK institution. And this is the first interdisciplinary event that is taking place without us, Euphoria, being the leading, convener of the event. So Euphoria is this alliance of excellence for research and innovation on sustainability, on Euphoria, which is the Greek word for sustainability. And basically what it does, it brings together the disciplines in order to develop science-based, mathematically based, that is mathematical modeling based, interactive and interdisciplinary holistic pathways for the transition to sustainability. And here is good because it's a general audience. I'm just giving the very basics here, and we can upscale, tune up the science. Sustainability is very well defined. We have the 17 goals, 169 targets. We have about 300 indicators measuring sustainability every year at different scales, from local scale to subnational, national, regional, international scale. And within these goals, we have 4 goals that are explicitly connected to ecosystems, the climate, the food systems, the water system, the land use and marine systems. We have 8 different goals that are focused on social cohesion and 4 goals that are focused on economic efficiency and economic growth and all this era of sustainable growth, which basically means that you bring the natural capital with the human capital and the man-made capital into a production mode that can satisfy current needs and at the same time not undermine the ability of future generations to satisfy their own needs. Now, within these goals, one overarching goal that affects heavily all other goals is the climate goal. All the goals are interconnected. No goal is fully implemented without the other goals being implemented, but one that is heavily affecting almost all goals is climate change. Now, in order to work so I am the chief scientist for the global sustainable development report of the UN now. We've been assigned 3 months ago, and we will submit this in 2027. And this is an assessment of assessments with regards to where we stand vis-a-vis the performance against the goals. So we know that currently we are on average globally of only 20% implementation of the goals. And this is relevant for climate change as well. So we definitely not gonna make the deadline of 2030 to fully implement the goals. We definitely need to accelerate our way towards implementing the goal. And this report is gonna focus on the question, how do we accelerate? And my cut as the chief scientist is that we have enough science. We don't know everything, but we have enough science. We know the coordinates of the different systems that need to be transformed, and co-design transformation is needed. You cannot treat each system in its silo. You cannot work on the climate system independently from the energy system, independently from the transport system, independently from the land use system, the marine use system, the socioeconomic, the finance system. So you need to identify the transformation pathways for all these systems, but working holistically, identifying the synergies and the trade-offs between the system. And my cut on this is that we have enough science, we have a lot of technology, not the final world, it's gonna be advancing and advancing, but we have enough already. We even have enough of finance within the blended finance space, private and public finance. What we need is acceleration of implementation. And acceleration of implementation means an explicit implementation mechanism that will be financed in order to identify at different scales, from global to local and the other way around, the investment portfolios that are needed to streamline financial resources, to streamline technological resources, to coordinate global efforts in order to increase and achieve implementation. And a lot of this portfolio of investments needs to be focused, yes, on infrastructural investments, yes, on renewables, yes, on nature-based solutions, yes, on digitalization, but also capacity building. And I'm going to close it here and come back with a final sentence. Within Europe, we presented a study at COP28 in Dubai 2 years ago that showcased, using deep neural network machine learning approaches, that 85% of the skills and professions that we need in the European market, I'm not talking about the global South market, in the European market, 85% of the skills and professions we need in order to implement the European Green Deal, the 150 laws that compose the European Green Deal, which is the transposition of the SDGs into the European legal framework, is missing from the labor market. So what on earth are we going to implement if we don't have the people to implement it? So we need a major investment on upskilling, reskilling, education in order to engage the people, the labor market, the stakeholder, to become part of the solution, to feel secure that they can be part of the solution and see their future in this solution pathway.
Right. This is the perfect bridge, because we talked about compound events. We need to understand the compound events, the mechanisms of the environment. The only way to build this into a model is interdisciplinarity, as
Yes.
Professor Koundouri said. And I come to you, Professor Kyriakopoulou, from the European higher education and research perspective. With your role as Greece's representative to the European Association of Environmental and Resource Economists, how can universities and research networks bridge evidence to policy and global negotiations, ensuring that regional realities drive ambitious but feasible global commitments?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Irini. Very important question. Of course, it's important we as universities and research networks to have this role of bridging research-based evidence and what is feasible from a political perspective, to have these policies that will depend on research-based and data that are data-based and use research-based evidence. So this is exactly what we try to do at the European Association of Environmental and Resource Economists. We have our conferences, we have multiple workshops and events, and we try to bring
Not only the European thing.
not only the European, but she asked me about the European, that's why, of course.
European stuff.
We also have Phoebe here, who is president of the World Congress of
And I've been for 6 years the European. I'm very proud of the European Association, but we have a US association, a Latin American, an African, an Asian. So we are big.
This is true, but now we talk about the
Thank you.
European okay, so I guess all the associations try to do more or less the same thing, to bring the research-based evidence and with political feasibility. So we have all these very ambitious targets and global commitments that we hear about them when we attend these big events like COP30 and so on. But these only work if they are informed by regional realities. So we need to take into account this regional perspective. We need to see what is technically possible, economically efficient, and socially fair on the ground, I would say. So somehow we need to translate, we need these translators, I can say, between science and policy. And environmental economics, I would say, has this crucial comparative advantage. We use these quantitative tools, we use models, we use cost-benefit analysis, behavioral insights, simulations, quantitative methods, and so on, that can make these very ambitious goals concrete and achievable. So we can go to the COP negotiations and say, here is what a 55% emission reduction means for a drought-prone Mediterranean economy, or here is what carbon pricing looks like in a touristic region, I would say. So this, what I want to say here is that we have the tools, and we can use those tools to measure the impacts and enforce and implement those measures that we know that work. And there is actually no time to wait and test different measures, right? We really need to choose the ones that work. So this is, since you asked about the European Association, we use all these platforms, we use our networks, we use our conferences, the workshops, and so on. And what we try to do is to use those to study in those conferences, to bring together experience from the researchers working on different fields in different regions, and bring all these results together, exchange experience, and see and test, like reflect if something works in another region, if we can apply this in on our own region, and so on. So for example, Greece, we might say, that has a similar context. If we want, for example, to try some strategies for water or biodiversity laws and so on, we can see what has worked in Italy or Spain, and try, for example, to adapt them in our own institutional realities. The other thing that I would like to point out, and I think here I can use my experience from working closely with stakeholders in Sweden, is that we really need to sit together in the same room, like the academics, the stakeholders, the policymakers, and try to jointly come up with those solutions that work, right? If we sit in our own offices and they sit in their own rooms, and we independently try to decide or design those policies, nobody can really take advantage of this, right? We need to sit together. Not only, the academics, they don't only need to contribute ex post, like measure the impacts of those policies. We really need to use our tools and measure and propose policies that could, shape the options ex ante, I would say. And this can only happen if we sit together with the policymakers and academics. So from my experience and from leading some ambitious projects in Sweden, I have seen that this is something that can work, and I would really like to see that implemented here in Greece a bit more often, I would say, to open this dialogue between researchers and policymakers. Great.
Thank you.
I think that's all.
So zooming in
into the regional aspect, we are here in Greece now.
Mhm.
What unique characteristics do you see in the Eastern Mediterranean and Greece amplified climate vulnerability?
Great. I think this is a very good question. I would like to report some results from the environmental economics literature that use the state of the art, I would say, when it comes to tools and analysis. So in very recent papers that study the spatial impacts of climate change, we have seen that there are, if we can say, there are both winners and losers in climate change, right? If you allow me to say that. And clearly, there is a clear message here. Greece and the Mediterranean region is in the losers. So we really need to take action because of that. Now, coming a bit, focusing a little bit more on what are the challenges, the specific challenges that we face here in Greece. Let me start by saying by mentioning maybe some of them. We have water stress, right? There is water stress, right? Greece and our neighbors face structural water scarcity due to low rainfall and even seasonal patterns and so on, and things become worse because there is water is underpriced, basically, right? So there is the scarcity is not reflected in the cost of using the water, and the consumers and the farmers do not pay the real cost, actually, and there is apparently little incentive to conserve, reuse, or invest in more efficient ways. Tourism can only make things worse here because we have high demand in the driest months, of course, and also in small islands where supply is more fragile. And then we have the wildfires. Wildfires is another sad story in Greece and in other regions in the Mediterranean. We have hot and dry summers that increase, of course, the risk, but still public spending is heavily focused on suppression rather than prevention. So it's often easier to fund, like easy solutions once you have to face the problem rather than invest in long-term resilience here. And this is a real problem, I believe, for our country. And then we have biodiversity loss and degradation of ecosystem services. This is something that, even though a lot of people nowadays, if not all of us, are familiar with climate change, I think not everyone knows what are the implications of biodiversity loss and the degradation of ecosystem services. By the way, if you want to know more, the ones that are based in Athens, there is a fascinating exhibition on this at the Natural History Museum here in Athens, where you can see all the hotspots, the biodiversity hotspots worldwide. It's really interesting, you can visit that. So Mediterranean is one of those biodiversity hotspots, right? And still, even though biodiversity protection is very important for climate resilience, we consider to see this underinvestment in conservation, and there is a lack of clear plan, a lack of clear national plan of how to safeguard natural capital. There are also other challenges. In Greece, we have we depend on sectors like tourism and agriculture that are often located in risky areas from a climate change perspective. So this is risky also from an economic perspective because we depend on climate-sensitive sectors. But the other thing that I wanted to point out is that climate challenges are not only about markets and sector, it's also about individuals and culture and how we behave, right? So those behavioral changes and behavioral patterns are very important for environmental economists. How we use the water, how much water we use, how we travel, how we cool or heat our homes, how we recycle, and so on, are all decisions that we take individually, but they are affected by social norms and our network and so on. There is a behavioral aspect to that. There is a cultural aspect. So I would say that since in Greece our lifestyles have evolved around mobility that depends a lot on private vehicles, intense use of energy and water in the summer, and limited resource awareness, there is a lot of room for a change here, right, from a cultural perspective. There are many ways to do that: information campaigns, behavioral nudges, community engagement. There are a lot of tools that we can use, but all these strategies have to be supported by clear policy frameworks. And at the same time, we need to use, as environmental economists, we want to have like a proper pricing mechanism, right? So we need to enforce proper pricing here, which will be in line with the polluter pays principle. The polluter pays principle is at the core of environmental economics. For the non-economist in the room, I can mention an example. If I decide, for example, to use my polluting car in the city center during rush hours, I have to pay a higher price compared to using the same car in the countryside where congestion and pollution have a lower social cost, right? So this is basically what the polluter principle describes. So this is really important to internalize the externalities and encourage cleaner choices. And one last thing, if I have one more minute, I really want to stress out here that the green transition itself is not socially neutral. It's not fair. We have seen that low-income households are disproportionately affected by the green transition, right? We need to invest, we need to protect, to make our houses more energy efficient. We need to switch to cleaner vehicles. This is not always easy for everyone. So the low-income households here have sometimes to bear some burden that is maybe higher than what they can do. So we really need to take into account these distributional impacts. Otherwise, there is this risk of undermining climate policy, such as we can all remember the yellow vests in France, right? So it's really important to take this fairness perspective into account. But at the same time, we need to support, we cannot support, I have to say that we cannot support polluting activities, right? It's not correct to give subsidies to heating oil. We should give subsidies to make our houses, for example, more energy efficient. We cannot keep supporting and giving subsidies for polluting activities. So this is another thing that we need to take into account. And maybe I can stop here.
Thank you, Professor Kyriakopoulou, for an extensive view of the regional level Greece. And if we try to zoom out now, Professor Koundouri, in your role as a chair of the UN SDSN Global Climate Hub, where we are shaping a holistic pathway for climate neutrality and resilience across all 193 UN member states.
Yes.
How do regional dynamics in the Eastern Mediterranean intersect with global climate diplomacy to inform the priorities for COP30?
Okay, this is another thing I do for the UN. I chair this Global Climate Hub. What is the mission of this hub? Is to design time that is dynamic pathways and cross-sectional pathways for each and every country in the climate agreement. So at the moment, when it was signed, it was 197 countries. The US is not in now. The US goes in and out depending on the president. But the idea is that IFORIA, the Alliance of Excellence of Research and Innovation on Sustainability, which is this team of research groups that I direct, most of them headquartered in Athens, funded, and at this university, one of the research groups is at this university, funded by various international and European projects. We have the mission to design for each and every country these dynamic pathways to decarbonization and climate resilience. So by 2050, we want to showcase how each of these countries will become net zero and will also be resilient to climate, to the extreme weather events that we know that because of climate we have higher frequency and extended severity. So this Global Climate Hub has three modes of function. The first one is the mathematical modeling. So there, what is done is downscaling the climate scenario as per the IPCC report. The IPCC is the international panel, intergovernmental panel for climate change. I'm one of the contributing scientists. There are hundreds of high-level scientists there. And we have some scenario for climate change, for the emissions, and for the economic development of each country and each region of the world. We downscale this scenario into the different sectors of the economy of each country. So we have the energy sector, the transport sector, the land use sector, including agriculture and forestry, the health sector, the innovation sector, and for each of these sectors, we design the changes that need to happen, the use of renewables, digitalization, changes in land use, changes in diets, investments in infrastructure, investments in behavioral change. There are many, many different interventions. And every year, for each country, you know what you need to change and what target you need to achieve in order to be consistent with your national commitments, mainly translated into the National Energy and Climate Plan, the Water Framework Directive, the Common Agricultural Policy. These are the three overarching policies within European countries. So you know what you need to do every year in order to get on board on a pathway where your national commitments are made. And these are not just national commitments, they are also regional commitments, European, and then they also transpose into international commitments like the International Commitment of the Climate Agreement, the Biodiversity Convention, the Convention on Water and Desertification, the SDGs. Now, when we do this mathematical modeling, this is integrated. So I'm not going to go to the Minister of Agriculture and tell him you need to change this, and then this is not consistent with what I'm going to say to the Minister of Energy, because the modeling is done in an integrated way, so the synergies and the trade-offs between the systems are taken into account. The second mode of interaction is the stakeholder engagement. So there we use the SDSN hubs. The SDSN is the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, led globally by Jeff Sachs. I lead the European hub with 900 universities. It has a hub in almost every country, and there we have living labs. of stakeholders with representatives of each of the major interest sectors, technologies, science, politicians, policymakers, financiers, businesses, the civil society. So there is a continuous interaction between the stakeholders, their information, their vision, their preferences, their fears, how they see their future, their attitudes, their behavioral characteristics, with the variables and conditions we pose on the mathematical modeling. And then when we have something that is acceptable to the stakeholders that are engaged through education, information, but also real co-design of the pathways and real shareholding of the suggested pathways. So we don't ever go in a country and say, you need to change that and these people need to do that, but these people, they're not gonna be asked, or they are not going to be shareholders of the final solution pathway. They need to be in the game in order to implement. So once we design the pathways of what needs to be done every year, we then go to the socioeconomic system. We have a general equilibrium mathematical model which embeds all of the changes, infrastructural, but also investment changes. It could be changes in policies, it could be changes in behavior, it could be infrastructural changes, and we give an answer to two questions. First, where is the finance going to come from? In Europe, most of the countries have fiscal space. Southern Europe, not so much, but there is a big incentive from the northern countries to mobilize finance, streamline finance to the Southern Europe in order to engage in a more unified and more efficient, at least, energy market for Europe, for energy security and food security. And the second question is a question that Effie also referred to, the equity aspect. So who is going to finance? If you have fiscal space, it's going to be taxpayers' money, but also you can de-risk your investments so that you can attract private money. Most of the money in this world is in private hands, so you can use pension funds, you can use philanthropy, you can use big companies and so on. And also, how do you care for the vulnerable? Because although the climate change policies and the European Green Deal policies are welfare increasing, and on average, in total, in Europe, this is what our results say, are gonna bring higher growth rates, more jobs, and more equity. You need to make sure that you have program of measures from those that are vulnerable, that is, those that are facing regressive effects from climate policies that cannot afford them. So this program of measures could be subsidies for upskilling and reskilling, subsidies from infrastructural interventions, energy efficiency, for example. It can be job retraining programs, it can be lump sum taxes, it can be a reduction of VAT on particular activities, and of course you don't subsidize in any way anything that is either polluting or destructive to your natural capital or your social cohesion, but you subsidize what you want to incentivize, so it can work as well. So mathematical modeling integrated between all the systems, stakeholder involvement in all the stages of the design of the pathways that derive from the mathematical modeling, but the stakeholders bring in the variables, the initial conditions, additional knowledge, and the third layer is an AI-ready platform, digital platform. The beta version is available that connects for all the countries. At the moment, we have the beta version for 100 countries. We collect all the data, time series data, cross-sectional data, Internet of Things data, satellite data, data from drones, data from institute infrastructures. Then it makes available the suite of models. So the different models are there. Anybody can use the data and run the models, and we provide capacity for running those models. And then we have the tools. We have visualization tools, digital twins for different interventions. We have VR experiences for, what you do at an extreme event, for resilience that is more localized than mitigation and so on. This tool is currently the scientific tool behind UNFCCC, which is the Conference of the Parties for Climate Change, is the UN partnership for climate change. It happens every year. It's going to be in Brazil this year. This tool that we have developed is used in the COP for climate every year to negotiate the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions of the country. That each country has a nationally determined contribution to the climate agreement, to this agreement that we signed in 2015. And basically now it says that we need to keep the increase in global average global temperature below plus 1.5% compared to what it was in the pre-industrial era. Now we are hitting that point, unfortunately, but many countries already have carbon capture and storage. So it's not just mitigating the emissions, reducing the emissions. It's not just adaptation to secure local populations. It's also carbon capture and storage and nature-based solutions in order to intensify reducing the already emitted CO2 from the atmosphere, because we have already reached the 1.5. So in a nutshell, if you are serious about it and you have the science and you have the stakeholders involved and you have open science and open access procedure like this platform that gives you all the data, all the models, all the results, it can be done. You can see on our website, if you go either to IFORIA website or the Global Climate Hub website, that it is absolutely doable and financeable to do this in the global north. In the global south, we need to restructure the global financial architecture, which again we can, and we discussed it in the UN conference in Seville this July. There are ways to restructure this global financial architecture in order to streamline funding to the global south, that it is increasingly vulnerable from climate change and biodiversity collapse, and shrinking fiscal spaces, and food insecurity, and energy security, and booming population, and of course increasing inequalities. So we can do it. We need to streamline all global efforts and have serious political leadership that convey the will to actually implement what is already there. The science is there, the technology is there, the money is there.
Thank you. And then this bridges the last question perfectly. Thank you, Professor Koundouri. So we talked about financial instruments, that we use them to applications, right? And Professor Schlegelmilch, given your current data ecosystems, what is the most urgent upgrade needed for early warning systems and preparedness? This is a very hot topic for Greece due to the wildfires and the floods, of course, and affects all the Mediterranean. And how can universities partner with governments and industry to accelerate this? And can you share an example
Sure.
Where a research finding directly influenced a policy decision or disaster response capacity?
Yeah, this is a great question and one that we come across all the time. And there's a graphic I like to use from a colleague showing the intersection of all these different data sources. And a couple of years ago, I actually came across something that I thought told the story even better. I think I have a slide loaded. Can we move to that slide? Now, I've shared this all over the world, and I'm going to be very disappointed if you can't tell me what this is. So I think of this a lot. I was here on vacation with my family, and it's ironic you're taking a picture with your phone of what I took with my phone. There's something very meta about that. And so you think about this, and in the ruins of the Temple of Apollo, and where the great oracle, where people came from far and wide in seek of wisdom and seek of guidance. And the advice that they got, right? The stories, at times it was accredited with civilizations changing for the better, realizing what they needed to do, embracing democracy. At other times, it led to their ruin. I tend to identify more with the majority who came and left more confused than when they came. That's usually our role in academia. And I'll tell the story of King Croesus of Lydia, right, and misunderstanding the point, right, and where he asked about going to war with Persia, and the prophecy for those who, and particularly those maybe in New York on the webcam, who might not know this as well. He was told, if you go to war with Persia, a great empire will be destroyed. And he thought, yes, all right, we're going to war. And of course, the great empire that was destroyed was his own. When we're dealing with climate change, when we're dealing with all of this data, we're dealing with inherently chaotic data sources and chaotic environments. We see data that can be very helpful and very illuminating in one space and can contradict sort of the development needs in others. We find ourselves at a point where we're decades behind on climate adaptation because we were so focused on climate mitigation and the moral hazard of carbon capture. The moral hazard of even talking about adaptation meant that we wouldn't make it to 1.5 degrees, which was never going to happen. I'll say that very plainly. It's ambitious. It's important that we're ambitious. It's important that we set these goals, but we have global regional conflict that is always going to come before long-term goals until it's too late not to. But all that being said, I will say that better late than never. And we are looking at this more holistically. We are looking at how do we balance mitigation with adaptation? How do we recognize that these don't have to be antagonistic forces, but these are synergistic forces? And so with this, I will say some of the work that we've been doing has been trying to look at this. How do we look at risk, need for climate adaptation finance? How do we look at how, not just the physical risk, right? We could talk about the Mediterranean and Europe, warming at twice the rate of other continents. But what does it mean in terms of people and jobs and livelihoods? We can already measure up to a percentage point of GDP loss as a result of extreme heat, right? We can talk about inches of sea level rise, but then we have to talk about the 47 million people in the Mediterranean region who are in the face of that loss. We can talk about storms carrying increased rainfall, but then we have to talk about, was it Storm Daniel, and dropping as much as a year's worth of rain in a single day, and the lives and livelihoods. Yeah, in a single location, yes. We can talk about the impacts to hydropower with prolonged drought seasons in agriculture and fisheries. So we have to look at not only what are those physical risks to hazards, but what is that capacity to cope? What is that underlying vulnerability? And that has to do with what are economies based on tourism and agriculture more exposed, in addition to more exposure to the hazards. When we talk about people, what is their ability to gather resources to be able to respond? The equity questions we keep talking about. Equity is not just some hippie left-wing word, right? It's a genuine recognition that disasters absolutely discriminate and that some people absolutely have access to more resources than others. But when we want to talk about evidence, and I think, this year COP, it was supposed to be the Indigenous Communities COP.
Is that impossible?
Ironically, by doing that, it probably made it the most difficult to reach, right? Because of the infrastructure issues and things. But regardless, the conversations are going to occur. People are going to continue to try for the better tomorrow. And let's choose to celebrate that at the moment. But But it is absolutely and undeniably going to be the adaptation finance COP. They're looking at day one commitments for funding climate adaptation, new vehicles for concessional finance for climate adaptation that not only reach the areas most in need from a physical hazard, but also from that vulnerability and that capacity to cope. And I think that if we want to look for where to find that wisdom, there are bright examples everywhere. And we've talked about a lot of the challenges we have here in the Mediterranean region. I want to talk a little bit about reasons to hope. That here, right here in Greece, is leading the way in the development of heat early warning systems. We're not even there yet in the US. And when it comes time, when we finally wake up to climate change being an issue within our political ecosystem, we'll be looking for examples, and we'll be looking to the east, to the west, to the west, whichever direction, depends which coast we're on. You know what I'm trying to say, we're gonna look to here. Here in Greece, you've created the Ministry of the Climate Crisis and Civil Protection to create the bureaucracies that are meant to span across the verticals and bring in the resources of the nation towards this. There's continued leadership on climate mitigation, on emissions reductions, including regionally with Greece, Cyprus, and Turkey, joining the Global Renewables and Energy Efficiency Pledge, a voluntary coalition, but one that continues to rise up. So I will say, too, that as we look to COP in a couple of weeks, that we can also look to the region, that in addition to the enormous challenges, is an enormous opportunity for leadership, and like in centuries past, can continue to be that place where travelers look from far and wide for guidance, for wisdom, and perhaps most of all, for hope.
That's
Professor Schlegelmilch. I think we have a bit of time for some questions from the audience. If you have questions, please raise your hand
And to tell us who you are.
yeah, of course. Please.
Thank you all for this very insightful discussion, and thank you, Mr. Koundouri, for putting another very successful event together. I'm Alexandra Evangelopoulos. I'm a recent graduate of Columbia School of International Public Affairs, and I'm currently unemployed. That's why I don't have anything else to say other than that. I've been meaning to ask you. You talked about the role of universities, the role of youth participation, and the need to reskill and upskill Europe's future workforce in order to actually have the professions that will solve the climate crisis. I was wondering, what about younger ages? What about teenagers and younger children who are very passionate about climate change because it comes from their own lived experience? How can we support their participation? How can we amplify their voices in a more, what's the framework for that?
Yeah. Can I go? Yeah. So the first thing that we need to be explicit about is what skills we need. And that is something that runs through the DNA of the whole education system. You don't just suddenly decide that after after you finish school and you go to university, you are gonna change the way people think and get the skills right. Because this is not just upskilling in terms of vocational training. This is a new way of thinking. This is a new way of educating. This is interdisciplinarity. When you're doing physics, you can tackle climate change as well as when you are doing economics, as well as when you are struggling with your math equations, as well so in all classes, in all topics, you can infiltrate the structure of interdisciplinary education. This is something that started across Europe. The Northern Europe is much more advanced. Australia is much more advanced. There are pockets around the world that you have advancements with regards to that. Then, in addition to interdisciplinarity, when you are going towards the ages where you need to be able to work between the disciplines, but you also need to focus on one particular area within a discipline that you're going to have your advanced skills without losing your ability to connect these advanced skills to the other disciplines that need to talk with you in order to solve a problem. There we need to know exactly which skills we need. And that's why we have developed many AI tools that allow you to incorporate policies and legal frameworks, combinations of those, and you put them in, and through the textual analysis, you can identify exactly the skills that you need. And based on that, you can revise your higher school curricula, you can revise your university courses, and you can also put together vocational training, upskilling and reskilling that is focused. It has the interdisciplinarity, but it also nurtures the skills that are needed. In Europe, DG Research and Innovation, which is the Ministry of Education and Research in Europe, we have the ERC, which is the European Research Council, which is about frontiers research. I'm happy to say that we are leading one of these programs in this university. We have Horizon Europe, which is about interdisciplinarity, advanced research. We have the whole thing with Erasmus, which is about interchanges of people across the countries, but also education, vocational education. A big budget of a few hundred millions is given every year for upgrading vocational education. So you need to get that through the whole education system. The most difficult part of these revisions are two. Education ministries, national education ministries are the most difficult to work with because they have many, many constraints and they move slow. And then educate the educators. How do you get all the teachers, all the professors of the university into a training program? It's not easy, it's costly, but it's also a lot of reluctance with regards to that. So we need to be very strategic. Europe is the most strategic continent, but a lot is happening also in Africa. And of course, Asia is booming in terms of the pace of the change. So China, India, the big tigers are really booming in terms of the pace of the change. But Europe, because it was first to transpose the SDGs into a holistic policy framework, and within that framework, we don't just have the targets, we don't just have the interconnection between the biodiversity and ecosystems and climate change and the energy market and the agriculture. We also have the integration of the principles of sustainable finance in our businesses and in our banks, which is huge. I mean, it's not yet done in the States, it is done in some countries in Asia, but you know that if you are a big company, you have to produce a sustainability report. This sustainability report has to quantify your transformation with regards to sustainability, your transformation with regards to educating and upskilling your workers, your transformation with regards to new technologies in order to get the policies. And then, based on this, you can attract financing and you can also talk to your trade partners in order to make sure that the whole value chain of an international production line is transposed into a sustainable one. in order to be eligible for funding, but it also in order to satisfy your consumers.
I'll just very briefly add, I think that, you know, in support of all of that, some of the very, and I talked with a colleague when we were trying to unpack this in my book on catastrophic incentives. What are the incentive structures that drive us to kind of educate the way that we do? And at the very early level, very fundamentally, right, we were all taught science, maybe not all of us, but probably most of us were taught science in a very reductionist, very deterministic kind of way, right? When you take that test, it's A, B, C, or D. It's true or false. You might get partial credit for showing your work, but there's always a right and a wrong answer. When in practice is science ever that clear? And especially with an intersectional field like climate science, climate adaptation, climate mitigation. And so from a very young age, we're sort of trained to look at the world through a very specific, solvable way that doesn't necessarily prepare for the openness to other perspectives. And this persists throughout the educational cycle. There was a great paper by a group out of Berlin. I can't remember the full title, but it was something like Two Hearts Beating in the Same Chest, and it was about universities struggling with this dual identity of disciplinary focused work while also trying to be interdisciplinary. So if you're, you know, the golden key of academia is tenure status, right? So if you write a paper on how we're applying all these things in the field with 4 different co-authors from 4 different fields, sounds great, right? For society, it sounds amazing. We're being interdisciplinary. You go before your tenure committee, it's not new discovery, it's applied. And it's not really in your field. You've done it with 4 other fields, right? It's discounted. Every step that brings value is discounted. So even within, you know, all universities are working with this, and even our school, the climate school, is intended to be interdisciplinary and working through ways on how can we be synergistic and work and value applied work without being threatening to traditional ways that still have their place. We do still need deep discovery. We need silos. Silos have a purpose, but we also need better mechanisms for bridging them, and to at a very young age create an openness to these other ideas that sometimes we unintentionally stifle with the rigidity of how we teach. Sorry, that wasn't very brief.
Please, we have time for one
Yeah,
question.
we have 10-15 minutes.
Please.
Okay. Hello, thank you for all being here. I'm a graduate of the business school and actually a graduate of Athens University of Economics and Business. So it's like I feel home in both circumstances. And I also sit on the board of a water company. So I'm very, very interested to hear your views. I heard you speaking about resilience, water resilience. One step back, how much do you think the Greek corporates, perhaps Jeffrey for you, by getting to know a little bit more about Greece, are embracing this kind of climate risk management practices, really embracing those? Do you see a change, for the last couple of years? What's your view on that? Thank you.
Maybe I'll speak holistically and buy time for y'all to give a real answer. Because I'm not familiar enough with Greece to be able to answer that. I can tell you with a lot of our work that we're doing with executive education and with corporate partnerships, what we've seen is sort of like a nod to the values and the importance of climate change and climate adaptation. And up until a few years ago, only those that were really looking to be thought leaders were really out in front of it. And then something happened, and all of a sudden this warning sign clicked, and we saw a lot of different groups getting involved. That something was COVID. Ironically, we didn't have this big figuring out of what happened with the pandemic like we normally do, and I'd love to talk about that. We don't have that kind of time right now. But but all of a sudden, I think it became very clear that there are these threats. And so all of a sudden, a lot of different industries were getting very interested in climate change, and then they started getting hit. We started seeing supply chain shortages for IV fluid because a lot of it was produced in Puerto Rico. Was hit by Hurricane Maria. We saw a lot of power companies that have done a lot of work here, not here in Greece, in the US, in Chile, in Puerto Rico, and sort of this symbiotic relationship where if you don't have power, you don't have water, but if you don't have water, you don't have power, especially for hydropower. We saw attempts at trying to, in Chile, they were working at developing desalination plants to try and kind of power some of the mining communities, and then they wanted to maybe provide some of that water, provide some of that electricity to the communities, but then weren't comfortable getting into the utility space and the liability and things that come. Perhaps most recently, we saw the report from McKinsey, I think 2 weeks ago, talking about $1 trillion in investable opportunities in climate adaptation by 2030. So the imperative is there because the impacts are being felt. We're behind, there's no doubt. I don't think there's any industry, there's any country, there's any place on earth where there is a critical mass of companies that are putting the full weight of the private sector behind this. But this is where my optimism comes from COP and from some of the signals that we're seeing, is that it is being seen that whether you're looking at it from a risk management side or an investable opportunity side, it's clear that this is a big money situation, which is going to activate a lot of things that only move when there is shareholder value involved in the equation. And so part of our imperative is to help fan those, maybe that's a bad analogy, put wind in that sail, while at the same time making sure that we don't lose that we don't sort of see the same inequities that we see time and time again, where that's the sole driver or the sole purpose for all of that. But on the Greek front, I would have to defer to my colleagues here on your take.
Yeah, on the Greek front, maybe I can mention the latest efforts of the Greek government. I was part of the advisory team of the Ministry of Finance here in Greece, where they, your question, sorry, that yeah, so there is actually some serious effort of, like trying to enforce some measures that will facilitate the green transition. There are a lot of difficulties. The problem that we have here in Greece is that there are so many actors that need to coordinate and agree on some specific policy. So, for example, when it comes to taxation, it's only the Ministry of Finance, but when it comes to other kind of policy instruments, there is so many actors and collaborators that need to agree and come together and so on. So things are a little bit more maybe bureaucratic and difficult to change compared to other countries. But there are efforts towards that. In that measures that we put together, that was something that was prepared like 4 or 5 months ago. In those measures that we put together and are going to be implemented are maybe measures mainly focused on transportation, road transportation. As you might know, in Greece we have the oldest maybe vehicles compared to other European countries. So there are measures towards that. There are also some measures towards improving the energy efficiency of buildings, but there we need more money. We need to use subsidies rather than taxation to incentivize people to improve the energy efficiency. But there are a lot of sectors where we need to see like more effort, like more measures to be implemented, like agriculture, touristic related activities, and so on. I think.
Which port are you part of? Which company's port?
The water company.
Water. The water company. EDAP, here in Athens. Well, we work in Euphoria. We consult all the 5 consultancies. The big 5 is not anymore the big 4, both in Greece but also in Europe, and we have some companies that are outside Europe as well. So we do the risk analysis for the implementation in Europe of the Corporate Sustainability Directive.
Yeah.
So here's my view on this. When you have, and it's going to be short because I know we don't have time. When you have a big company and you can talk to them about measuring the risks and identify the revision of the portfolio in terms of investments in order to hedge against those risks. So once you stop talking about ESGs the environment, social and governance criteria, and you start transposing those into a risk management business plan, they are on board. Those that have capacity. Public companies do not have capacity. They have some, because we work with our big ERC project is on water, urban water systems, and we've been talking with ADAP a number of times to give them the structure that needs to go in order to become, sustainable, risk hedging against all the different risks, not just climate. So it is less ready to get on board. But there are other companies that have more capacity, and as soon as you translate that into risk management, then they are on board. I'm also part of the European Investment Bank in translating the corporate sustainability directive for smaller companies. So those that now are not obliged to submit the corporate sustainability report, those that are obliged are on board. They can understand what is going on. They can see it as risk management. They make the investment. It makes sense because they can reduce their cost. They can increase their market share, and at the end of the day, they can hedge against the risk, so profitability increases. Really, if you take that seriously, profitability increases, not only in the long run or in the medium run, but also in the short run. Now, for the smaller companies, the Corporate Sustainability Directive and the ESG is too complicated. There is no capacity, so we are through the omnibus. Basically, the omnibus is about, downscaling a bit the ambition for the small companies. A revised omnibus, absolutely. Yeah. So we need to really talk that language of these companies at different scales and really be sensible. Because if they see sense into it, and if they see a clear support for their own shareholders, then they are on board, yes. Yeah.
We have time for one more question. We don't have it. Somebody wants.
Hi, I'm Ioanna Evangelou, and I am a communications and marketing manager for a startup company called Wave Dynamics. And we are dealing with wave energy, and our base is on Ikaria Island. I was wondering about innovation and economic science. How flexible all these are for the new comings for the things that will come in science regarding innovation. I mean, AI was not what it is now. We need a lot of energy. Things have changed. What will happen in the 5 next years? We don't know. How flexible are these things regarding all of
You mean the policy framework?
Yes.
Well, for startups, it's very flexible. First of all, we have to talk because we incubate 250 startups at our accelerators.
Yes.
And we have some on wave energy, but not Greek ones. There is one from Nikitakis, but it's in the Ionian, not in Ikaria. So I don't know about your
I think
company.
we are in the egg accelerating program.
Okay, you are down in Europe again.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So I studied all of that. I'm coming from a different field. I have an MA in arts from King's College. And studying all these things, I understand because, the craft of the science goes on and creates some things that they will certainly change the situation.
Yes, but a company is a very dynamic thing.
Exactly, yes.
The funding for startups is there. There are a lot of VCs for seed funding in the country, and after you get the seed funding, you can go to the next level with more European VCs.
The policy regarding startups is amazing, and they are very encouraging, and they're giving tools.
Yeah, we have tools and financing. The important thing is to understand that now with all these uncertainties, we function not under lately, but not just now, with the last, I would say, 20 years, we function not under uncertainty, but under ambiguity. So we don't know the probabilities of the uncertain events. We don't know that. So we need to transpose into companies that are adaptable enough in order to have risk management plans that integrate this ambiguity. So you have to work under different scenarios.
Exactly.
So your stochasticity is not the stochasticity that you can handle in a probabilistic world. You have ambiguity, and you need to work with ensamples, and we have seminars on that. And this is the true situation. You know, you can design your company plan based on this ambiguity. But the good thing is that the policies, at least at the European level, are somewhat stable.
Yes.
So at least you have the targets.
As far as I have understood, the economic science, they bring legislation in a way that brings also justice, because we have
the distribution,
yes.
like ethical.
So I regard innovation and political science as friends for these things, that they should work together for that. And maybe there is a point where there can be some developments that they can change the situation, because all this scientific progress for your science, when you go back to the legislation of each country, they're not really blooming regarding the political developments.
But nowadays, that maybe the US is not the leadership, at least in terms of the current financing scheme under consideration, is not the leadership example. Europe is doubling the cutting research funding.
Yes.
So I don't want us to act like brain drainers. It's not nice. We need to support. So it's about also supporting people that work in the States and other places in the UN. I know this because I'm an ERC ambassador, but it has a major leadership role now to support research and innovation.
Yes. We need this magic moment, because you mentioned Delphi, and democracy is innovation. So if there was no innovation even then, there will not be a solution for how to handle these situations of governance. So thank you very much for your answer.
Thank you. I think we don't have any more time for questions. I would like to personally thank our speakers, Professor Schlegelmilch, Professor Koundouri, and Professor Kyriakopoulou for their invaluable insights and contribution to this panel discussion that was co-hosted by Columbia Global Center Athens and the Economics Department of Athens University of Economics and Business, Stefano Pandolfo, the director of the Columbia Global Center in Athens, and its team, Marilyn and Indre, and Evangelos Vasilatos, professor and head of Department of Economics at the Athens University of Economics and Business, that made this event happen. We want to thank our audience that participated in our panel discussion, the audience that are here present in Athens University of Economics and Business this Monday afternoon, and our audience that participated online via our YouTube live stream. The discussion will be uploaded to our website and Columbia's website pages. So thank you all for your participation. Thank you.